Exodus 20 is where we are, making our way through the Ten Commandments. Going to keep going throughout the summer here. And we are on commandment number 4 this morning. Commandment number 4. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. In fact, let's read. The verses we'll be in this morning is verses 8 through 11. So let's read them. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Okay, so we'll stop there. We are going to spend a little time this morning thinking about this, and I hope this is, as always, thought-provoking for you and helps you to think deeply about God's character. We've been saying along the way here that while we hear the word commandment and our natural reaction tends to be kind of negative, if it feels like it's imposing in a way, we're seeing that these are coming from the gracious heart of God. This is God seeking to persuade his people of his goodness, of his provisions. This is not God in some endeavor to enslave his people. He just freed them from slavery under Pharaoh. This is a liberating God. And so we've said the problem is not with the commands themselves. The problem is certainly not with the God who gave the commands. The problem is with our perspective and how we tend to view things. And so even that word commandment we misconstrue. But we're seeing contextually here that God's heart is on display, and this is no exception to that, this commandment about the Sabbath day. I said to you last week when we talked about taking God's name in vain, that was one that was very familiar to me as a kid growing up, and we had some laughs about why that would be the case for me and every other child. And then this one, in a way, maybe was less obvious in terms of what the point of it was. So remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So basically, God's saying, take a day off, which on one level you could ask the question, why does God even care if we take a day off or not? So that's one question you could ask. And another one would be, so this one seems like this should be easy. Like, wouldn't this be easy? I mean, thou shalt take an all expenses paid vacation. Sounds good, right? Thou shalt get some R&R. Sign me up, right? And yet we find really, we're going to see this morning that we're really not any better at keeping this one than the others. We're not good at resting either. And for us to get that and see what it means to really rest, not just like take a day off, but really rest at the spiritual level, at the soul level, we need God desperately for that. And so we're going to see how he reveals himself, how he gives us himself through Christ, once again, with this commandment like every other. But first of all, let's just consider the idea of rest and him commanding this for his people as they're wandering in the wilderness. And you might remember earlier in Exodus where this comes up, God said, hey, they had no bread, so I'm going to provide manna, and here's what you're going to do. For 6 days, you're going to gather that manna every morning, and there's going to be enough just for that day. And don't keep it overnight. Don't stockpile it because it'll rot, and it will have worms filling it and everything else. So just 1 day at a time. However, on the 6th day, gather enough for 2 days so that on the 7th day, you can rest. You don't have to gather it. In fact, he said, don't prepare it. Just take what was left over from the prior day. Now, right there you have God teaching them something important about his provisions. He gave them just enough for each day, and that 7th day they were to take what was left over and not do anything, not lift a finger, but just receive on that day. And the Israelites, as was their pattern, as is our pattern, they just couldn't comply. I mean, so you had some going out and looking on the 7th day for bread, even though God said not to do that. They did it anyway. So hard to trust him. So it stems from that earlier experience, and now God includes it here within the Ten Commandments, saying, look, I am your provider. You can rest. He built one day into the order of creation even, and he mentions that. Hey, in 6 days, God made the heavens and the earth, but on the seventh day, he rested. It's not like God needed 6 days even to create the heavens and the earth. If he's who Genesis 1:1 says he is, namely God, the creator, he can do it however he wants, in whatever time frame. But he designed this week and created things, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, on purpose. And even designed the seventh day as a day of rest in which he rested. And he says, this is now the prescription for you as well, that you would rest just like I rested. Rest is, generally speaking, and really scientifically speaking, really good for us. We need rest. You know, sleep is really important. Can't go all that long without it. Can't function well without it. Mental health, physical health, really important. It's restorative. There's all sorts of studies about people who don't get much sleep and the damaging effects on the mind and the body and even the cardiovascular system and on their likelihood of developing depression and anxiety and things like that, all related to sleep patterns. I heard a TED Talk this past week, Tracy Hoffer sent my way, on breathing. This guy talked 15 minutes about breathing, explaining that we don't even know how to breathe right. We don't breathe right. So he had all these principles about proper breathing and how important that is, mentally and physically, and all the implications. It'll blow your mind. If you want, I'll send it to you. Let me know. I can send it to you. It's interesting. But I'll give you a little teaser. It's good to breathe through your nose, apparently. And a lot of us are mouth breathers, and that's bad. So lots of details he goes into. Interesting stuff. But even something as simple as breathing. It's involuntary. You do it all the time. But we learn these patterns of perverting even how we do that. And it relates to how we think and our anxiety and how we handle stress and all that. It's just fascinating. And God says to his people, look, rest is good. This is a good gift to you, to rest. I mean, he created day 1 through 6, which reminds us that everything in this world is from him. Even our ability to work comes from him. Our ability to breathe comes from him. He's sustaining it all every moment, the New Testament tells us. And he says, on one day, this is a special day, a holy day, a set-apart day, to remember that. To have that illustrated for you by the fact that you literally stop and rest. But we got to go deeper than that. We've got to go deeper if we're going to get the significance of this. And as we head there, let's reflect on this. The Israelites who said going back to when God provided the manna, and they still went out looking for it anyway, and he gives this commandment, and later in Exodus, he actually assigns the death penalty to this commandment, to violation of this commandment. Many of the commandments have the death penalty as a consequence if someone violates a commandment. I don't know if you knew that. Maybe you knew that with some of them. But many of them literally have the death penalty. I want you to see this. Really important. Exodus 31. Turn there. In case you don't believe me. Because again, it seems pretty extreme to have the death penalty associated with this commandment. For not taking a day off, you're executed. Exodus 31, 12 through 17. And this is one of several passages where this is prescribed, but let's look at this one. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, and this is, I think I said chapter 31, verse 12, start there. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, but as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, you shall surely observe my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. You heard it, right? He said it right there. Put to death. For 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. There it is again. So the sons of Israel shall observe the Sabbath, to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It's a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the seventh day he ceased from labor and was refreshed. There it is, coming right from God. The death penalty. Pretty intense. And yet people still violate it. In fact, later on in the Old Testament, the book of Numbers, there's a man out working, gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And Moses and Aaron go before God and say, what are we supposed to do here? Do you really want us to kill him? And God says, stone him, put him to death. And they did. For not taking a day off. I mean, if you're thinking, I hope you're thinking, that's pretty extreme. This morning, Jocelyn said to me, she's still processing, they watched Avengers Infinity War last night because we're going to see Endgame today. That's our Father's Day celebration. Part of it. We've been wanting to see it. It's barely still in the theaters, so we're just making it. But they just watched Infinity War, and this morning Jocelyn says, and some of you who you may know nothing of this, so sorry, but others of you, the big bad guy is Thanos, right? And Josie's like, Thanos is crazy. I hate that guy. He's crazy. He thought he was helping the world by killing half the world because he kills half the world's population at the end of the Infinity War movie. She's like, he's crazy. Can't stand that guy. What a villain. Hey, we're reading here about the God of the Bible who says if you don't take a day off, you're put to death. Are you thinking? If you're thinking, that's pretty weird. Should be hard to swallow. So what's the point? I said earlier we're going to go deeper. This helps us go deeper. In fact, let me make this more interesting. So Mark 2 was read earlier about the Sabbath day, and you know Jesus claimed to be the Lord of the Sabbath, and what did he do on the Sabbath? He healed, he served people. He was accused of breaking the Sabbath. He let his disciples work in a sense. They did something that Jews never would have allowed. They took grain and they sort of did some threshing with it so they could eat it. And Jesus said, that's all fine because they need it. And he says, look, Sabbath was made for the man, not man for the Sabbath. Sabbath was a good gift from a gracious God to benefit man, not the other way around. It's not that man is subservient to this Sabbath. Well, that all sounds great, it's awesome, but what about this then? Why back then when you first gave this commandment, why the death penalty? I mean, we should grapple with that question. Is this coming from a gracious God or not? So here's how we dig into it. God designed the world in such a way that physical realities illustrate spiritual realities. Things we experience in the physical part of our lives point us to deeper spiritual realities. God told Adam and Eve, if you reject me, you will surely, what? You'll surely die. Every violation of every commandment is a manifestation of humans' choice or preference for death. Humans, in a way, addiction, compulsion for death. So every time a human, the Jews back then, us today, breaks one of God's commands, we show that we have this, use this big word, penchant for death. We prefer death. This miserable, sort of suicidal death spiral we are on, spiritually speaking, if left to ourselves. So, every time someone broke this commandment like the others, it was that person showing their preference for death. It was them signifying, or we could say manifesting, their desire for death. You following so far? And God created the world in such a way, and gave his law in such a way and assigned penalties to the violation of these laws in such a way so as to manifest or signify the death that we have chosen for ourselves in rejection of our God. You follow? And says, look, you don't take me seriously. You don't take my kindness as your heavenly Father seriously. You are addicted to death. You choose death in countless different ways. And I am giving you my law. Ultimately to get you to life, but in order to get you there, first I've got to make death real to you. I'm making it real to you. You don't take it seriously. I do take it seriously, and I'm going to help you take it seriously. So this is not that God has a split personality or is some kind of schizophrenic or something. This is part of God's pursuit of his people. This is God seeking to persuade all of us how important it is that we rest. And now we got to go a little deeper even with that, because here's the thing. Back then, this is largely a physical reality. Hey, on the seventh day, you stop and you just eat what's there, and it's all about the physical body and getting actual rest, and that's a good thing. And I said earlier about different ways that's a good thing, from the sleep you get to how you breathe and everything else. All that is good, okay? But on the deeper level, let me ask this question. How many of you have ever taken a vacation in hopes that it would be restful and came back at the end of that vacation more exhausted than before you left? Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. Almost 100% of the people in this room. And if you're not raising your hand, you probably don't even remember when you've had a vacation. Because that's what happens basically every time. Why is that? Here's why. Because you can stop physically and still not be really resting in here. The mind can just be going. I remember one time being on this beautiful beach, beautiful setting, just doing nothing except supposedly there to enjoy the beach, and my mind was just going on goals or failures, things I wanted to make up for, and just, is that rest? Well, in one sense, maybe, but not really. It's not really rest. So on one hand, you have the physical reality of we have to work to survive, and God says that's a good thing. In fact, the New Testament says, look, if someone's not willing to work, they shouldn't be able to eat. Like, you got to have consequences. People need to know that work is a good thing. Our culture needs to know work is a good thing for all of us, to be productive. That's healthy. Even though it's cursed, and there's going to be resistance to our work always. It's going to be hard. But it's still a good thing as creatures made in the image of God. And that takes effort and blood, sweat, and tears and all that, right? The sweat of our brow, like Adam and Eve, going way back to the beginning. That's the way it's always been. It's supposed to be. And so we work, and we work in order to survive. But God says, look, even that is a gift. You have that ability because I'm giving it to you. I'm sustaining. I've given the ability to use your body and exert yourself and produce things and live. And that's tiring. And the seventh day is a way to stop all of that and to realize that all of that's a gift and I can just receive, and it's okay. It's not going to all fall apart or unravel because I take a day off. So there's that level. But then underneath it, there's this level that we also work for spiritual life. We're trying to find life. And so as usual, we use these different terms to describe that. It's the best way I know of to get at this. When the Bible talks about spiritual life, it talks about what it means to live in relationship with our Creator. And it talks about our sense of security and our sense of satisfaction and our sense of significance. Love and joy and peace and all the fruits of the Spirit are fruits of a relationship with God. And to not have them is to not be at rest. It's to be working, toiling, trying, struggling, straining, striving. You get it? And we are constantly doing that. I mean, I dare you to take 30 minutes during a time of the day in which you will not fall asleep. And I know for some of you that's hard to find. It's basically can fall asleep any time of day. But try to find a 30-minute block when you're pretty confident you won't fall asleep and just do nothing. Maybe sit in a lawn chair or, I don't know, on your couch or get in your bed or whatever, wherever you're comfortable, and just lie there without falling asleep, and just try to just be completely at rest and not think for a second about what you're supposed to be doing, where you wish you would have gotten in life, what you want to get next week, or who's this problem and that problem and where I used to be. And I mean, I dare you to try it. Now, you might be able to pull it off. You might be able to. God gives us those periods of relief. I've had them, you've had them. But most of the time, most naturally, our mind just goes, doesn't it? And that speaks to this deeper issue of it's hard to just rest. To be still and know that He is God, as it says in Psalm 46. He says, cease striving and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. I am God, you're not. Just rest. So He invites us. Okay? But here's what happens. We tend to take these commandments and make them superficial. The Jews did it. This is what they did. Wow, God's really serious about this. We remember that dude that was killed for violating this command. So let's take this really serious. And if the line for not violating, keeping the commandment, the line is here for that, here's what we'll do. We'll make a line here so that we don't even cross this line, and that way we'll make sure we don't cross that line. So if the commandment is don't do any work, then here's what we'll do. We'll say, hey, you can't even lift anything heavier than a dried fig. That was one of their laws. They gave these specifics to it. Hey, let's make it really concrete. And I don't know what a dried fig weighs, but apparently not much. So don't lift anything heavier than that. And don't take any more than 3,000 steps. They didn't have Fitbits or anything else back then, so I don't know. I guess they're counting in their heads. I don't know how you don't lose count after like 11, but that's what they did. And there was even some modern versions of it where that you can't drag a chair through soft soil because that would be like a furrow or like a trench for gardening or whatever. So you can't do that because that would be like work. And you can't eat fish with bones. I don't know, where's Patrick? With the trout from the, sorry, you just got to eat the bones, I guess. You can't pick the bones out of your fish because all that's work. So here's what we'll do. We'll keep this commandment. We'll try really hard. And so we'll make all these extra rules so that we don't break that rule over there. Does that sound exhausting to you like it does to me? That's what humans do. And today we have our own versions of that. And I've had strict rules for myself related to the day of rest, which now tends to be, we view it as Sunday. As New Testament believers, it tends to sort of be that way. And I remember friends in college who were Sabbatarians, and they wouldn't do homework on Sundays unless it was Bible class homework. That they would do. Or Greek, which was a Bible language, so then there was like a loophole for that. So they would do that, but they wouldn't do English or history or math on Sundays because they didn't want to violate the Sabbath, and they would watch college football all season. That was permissible because that was aired on Saturdays, but they wouldn't watch the NFL because those games were on Sundays. I guess they could watch Monday night football or Thursday night, but that's about it. So again, it's like, okay, let's figure out how to make sure we don't break this, and that's what we do with it, okay? But that's not the point. The point is the deeper issue of, hey, you pick death, you reject your Heavenly Father, you don't know how to rest, your mind is constantly going, you think you have to secure life for yourself, you're either anxious or angry or greedy constantly because you're trying so hard in this world to get for yourself, to work for yourself, to get life. And God says, I'm your life. So how the heck do we get there? How do we get there? We don't get there through making up our own laws and rules and everything else. We get there through a person who came to rescue us, who is the embodiment of rest. Jesus is our Sabbath rest. He's our rest. He's the way God says loud and clear, I've given you everything you need. You have everything. So just relax. I've beaten your biggest foe. I've solved your biggest problem. Just rest. He lived in this world as, this is fascinating, Lord of the Sabbath. There's a sense in which Jesus was over the Sabbath, saying, I am the author of the Sabbath. I am in charge. Disciples, go ahead and eat the grain. You're going to be fine. There's that, and there's a sense in which he lived under that, in which he fulfilled that, because he always lived according to the spirit of the law and depended upon his Father at every moment and never was a nervous wreck, never was scared of what was going to happen. He just implicitly trusted, even in the worst part of his life, even the darkest hour of his life. Rest. And God says, the only way I can get you humans back to myself and back to rest is not through a formula or a program, but through a person. So he says, I'm coming to bring rest to you, to grant rest to you through Christ. So last passage I'll read to you. Hebrews 4, which makes this point. Hebrews 4. Listen, this is the writer of Hebrews describing the experience of the Israelites in the wilderness wanderings. And I want you to hear how he points all this to Jesus. And remember I said earlier, God was persuading them, even by giving the law. It's God, Hebrews here is going to say he's preaching good news to them, even back then. And persuading them, even back then. And then all of it comes to fruition in the person and work of Jesus. And so here's what he says. It says, therefore, let us fear if while a promise remains of entering his rest, any of you may seem to come short of it. For indeed, we have had good news preached to us just as they also did. But the word they heard did not profit them because it was not united by faith in those who heard. For we who have believed enter that rest, just as he said, I swore in my wrath they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has said somewhere concerning the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this passage, they shall not enter my rest. Therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly had good news preached to them failed to enter because of disobedience, he again fixes a certain day today, saying through David, after so long a time, as has been said before, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself rested from his works, as God did from his. Therefore let us be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience. Now that was a mouthful and a half, so let me explain what he's saying. He's saying God was offering himself to his people back then. He was seeking to persuade them of his kindness and his goodness, of life. The Ten Commandments just show what life looks like in relationship with God. God's saying, this is what it is. This is what life is. And he says, but they were not persuaded. Literally, it says unbelief there. They were disobedient there. And the Greek word is they were unpersuaded. Literally, it's they were not persuaded. And so all of that played out historically, and he says, but there was always this promise, this forward-looking promise to a greater day of rest. And here it is. It comes when Jesus shows up. And that's why he says, be diligent to enter that rest. And he doesn't mean come up with 1,000 different rules to make sure you keep one day set aside a certain way. He says, be diligent, work hard to not work hard. And where and how does that happen? It happens when we see that Christ said, it is finished. That everything necessary for your soul to live and my soul to live has been accomplished for you. It's given to you as a gift. It's not a wage earned, it's a gift given, period. And whether it's a Thursday afternoon or a Monday morning or a Sunday or a Saturday, before sundown or after sundown and all these other things, rest is available in Christ. In our conversion, we come to God with nothing in my hands I bring, simply to the cross I cling. I just receive, and throughout our Christian lives, growth looks like bumping into our constant striving and struggling and straining, and over and over and over again, hearing God say to us through Jesus, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's the point. That's the point. And we are not good at doing that. Even when we know the truth of the gospel, we're still not good at it, are we? We don't keep this commandment any better than any of the others that have been listed here. And this one, like all the others, stems from that first one, have no other gods before me. It stems from that. It builds off of that. It points back to that. And how does God show us? He shows us through Christ that I have done everything for you. It's okay. You don't need what you think you need for survival. Even in your darkest hour, I'm going to be with you. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Physical death is not your biggest enemy. It's not your biggest problem. We're all going to it's going to happen to all of us. And the amount of time and energy we waste trying desperately to preserve our physical lives, and God's like, look, it's gonna be gone. But your biggest problem's been solved. And so when you wonder, how in the world does the God of the Old Testament tell all these people, hey, you're going to die if you commit these sins, if you violate these commandments? How can that fit with the gracious guy? It's how it fits. He's persuading you. Life apart from me isn't life at all. It's death. I'm helping you see that. I'm helping you sense it. I'm making that manifest. I'm illustrating that for you in severe ways. And then I point you to, and here's where it all comes together, and we'll close here. Kind of reiterating the same point, a little different angle. Jesus takes the penalty of the law of death, doesn't he? For the violation of all these commandments, he takes that death. And God says, see how I love you. See how I've covered you. So if you wonder if I'm going to provide for you, your physical needs, your spiritual needs, if you wonder if something's in your life that you just can't seem to have joy or peace because something is out of line in your life, he's saying, look to the cross and look to where everything was accomplished for you. Death was taken for you, and my love was poured out for you. Do you need to doubt the love of your Father for you when you see what he's done for you? What he has given up for you to know? That it's all taken care of. That's where we see him most clearly, is in the cross and what Christ accomplished for us. So all these signposts in our lives, and I know you've got them, and I do too. Sometimes I experience rest, and sometimes I don't, and I just can't. I give you that one example. I think many examples of seasons in my life where I just couldn't rest. And my only hope for it was that somehow, some way, God would meet me in that dark place and show me, hey, what you think you need or what you're fighting for, you don't need. Christ is your life. He's your rest. So I hope that's encouraging to you. I'm going to pray and close this. God, thank you for your word here in Exodus. Thank you for your pursuit of us, your consistent pursuit of us, coming after us, seeking to persuade us. Historically, through the law and through other expressions and extensions of yourself, and most clearly through the sending of Jesus into this world, the embodiment of true love and true grace, and the one who imparts every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places to us. So God, we are people who are full and rich beyond our wildest dreams, and yet so often we too are unpersuaded. We too lose sight of who you are and how good you've been to us. And we don't rest. We toil and we're exhausted. Thank you for the gospel. Thank you for inviting us back to Christ. Thank you for how every passage in Scripture points us to Christ, and how this points us to Christ, this commandment. Help us to rest in him, God. And if we need physical rest, to find it and take days off and things like that. But most importantly, that we would see you in those deepest levels of angst and turmoil and struggle, and that there we would be reminded of what Christ has accomplished for us. In his name we pray.